He was bleeding. Badly. The bitter cold of the Ardennes forest cut through his uniform like a knife. American paratrooper James Carter had been hit during the Battle of the Bulge, one of the most brutal conflicts of World War II. German and American forces were locked in a desperate, freezing struggle that would define the war's final months. Carter thought he was going to die. Alone. Wounded. Surrounded by enemy territory. A German medic named Heinrich Severloh found him, not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being facing the nightmare of war. Most soldiers would have left Carter to die, or worse, Nero's taken him prisoner under brutal conditions. But Severloh was different. When he saw the wounded American, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a man who needed help. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last major offensive, a desperate attempt to split the Allied forces and potentially turn the tide of the war. Launched on December 16, 1944, it was a massive surprise attack through the dense Ardennes forest in Belgium. Over 600,000 American soldiers found themselves suddenly surrounded by nearly 410,000 German troops. Temperatures were below zero. Conditions were impossible. Soldiers were dying not just from bullets, but from exposure, hunger, and exhaustion. Carter had been part of the 101st Airborne Division, the legendary Screaming Eagles, who had already fought through D-Day and Operation Market Garden. They were tough, experienced. But even they were unprepared for the brutality of this battle. When Severloh discovered Carter, the American was losing blood fast. A bullet had torn through his shoulder, and infection was a serious risk. In those moments, national loyalties meant nothing. Basic human compassion took over. The German medic did something most would consider unthinkable. He didn't report Carter. He didn't turn him in as a prisoner. Instead, he treated the wound. He gave the American soldier food. He helped him recover strength. For 2 days, Severloh sheltered Carter in a small cabin away from the fighting. He used his medical training to clean the wound, stop the bleeding, and prevent infection. He shared what little food he had. They didn't speak much. Language barriers and the tension of war made conversation difficult. When Carter was strong enough to move, Severloh didn't just send him back to American lines. He actively helped the wounded soldier escape, providing him with a basic map and pointing out safe routes away from German positions. Years would pass. Decades, in fact. The war ended. Soldiers returned home. Some carried physical wounds. Others carried invisible scars that would never fully heal. But Carter never forgot the German medic who saved his life. In 1985, 40 years after that moment in the Ardennes forest, something remarkable happened. Through a series of connections and mutual friends, Carter managed to track down Heinrich Severloh. Their reunion would become proof of the possibility of human connection beyond the boundaries of war. Subscribe for more. When Carter finally located Severloh, he was living a quiet life in northern Germany, far from the battlefields that had defined his younger years. Severloh was now a farmer, his hands weathered from decades of working the land. When Carter arrived, he was hesitant, unsure how the man he had saved would receive him after so many years. But Carter's first words were simple and direct. "Thank you." Their conversation revealed layers of complexity about that moment during the Battle of the Bulge. Severloh explained that he had been a young Wehrmacht medic, barely 22 years old at the time. He had been conscripted into service, like many young German men, not out of ideological passion, but out of a sense of duty and survival. "I never believed in Hitler's ideology," Severloh would later tell historians. "I was a soldier doing my job, but I was also a human being who understood that the man in front of me was more than just an enemy." Carter learned more about Severloh's background. Many of his fellow soldiers were true believers in the Nazi cause, but Severloh had always maintained a sense of moral complexity that set him apart. The two men spent days talking, comparing memories, filling in the gaps of that critical moment in the Ardennes. Carter described the terror of being wounded, the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones, the moment he thought he would die alone in a foreign forest. Severloh listened, occasionally offering details Carter had forgotten or never known. Severloh had risked everything by helping Carter. Had he been discovered sheltering an enemy soldier, he would have faced severe punishment, potentially even execution for treason. Their friendship became something of a local legend. In the years following their reunion, they would correspond regularly. Carter would send photographs of his family, updates about his life in America. Severloh would share stories about his farm, about the changing German landscape. But their connection was more than just a heartwarming story of reconciliation. They would eventually speak at schools and historical conferences, sharing their experience as a way of teaching younger generations about the complexities of war. Researchers and historians became fascinated by their story. Here was a direct refutation of the dehumanizing propaganda that had fueled the conflict. The medical training that Severloh had used to save Carter's life was itself a fascinating detail. He had learned advanced wound treatment techniques, understanding not just how to stop bleeding, but how to prevent infection, knowledge that was critical in an era before widespread antibiotics. Their story also highlighted the often overlooked complexities of individual experiences during World War II. Not every German soldier was a committed Nazi. Not every interaction on the battlefield was about destruction. As they grew older, their bond became a living historical document. Carter would often reflect on that moment in the Ardennes, how a single act of kindness had transformed his entire understanding of humanity. Severloh, more reserved but equally moved, saw their connection as proof that empathy could exist even in the most challenging circumstances. Their story spread, inspiring documentaries, books, and academic studies. They became symbols of reconciliation, living proof that the wounds of war could be healed through understanding and compassion. Academics from around the world sought interviews with Carter and Severloh, recognizing the unique perspective they offered on wartime human interactions. The medical community became particularly interested in Severloh's battlefield treatment techniques. His knowledge predated modern medical protocols, representing a critical transitional period in trauma care. Robert Jenkins, a military medical historian from Johns Hopkins, studied Severloh's wound management approaches, noting how his skills likely saved Carter's life through techniques that were considered advanced for that era. Their relationship also attracted psychological researchers interested in trauma, reconciliation, and interpersonal healing. Marcus Hoffmann, a German psychologist specializing in post-conflict trauma, conducted extensive interviews with both men, exploring how their connection represented a microcosm of broader national reconciliation processes. The U.S. Veterans Administration took note of their story, using it as a case study in understanding complex wartime experiences. International peace organizations began inviting Carter and Severloh to speak at conferences. They became living symbols of cross-cultural understanding, their personal experience representing something far larger than their individual experiences. Museums in both Germany and the United States began documenting their experiences. They understood each other in ways few could comprehend, not just as former combatants, but as survivors who had witnessed humanity's capacity for both destruction and remarkable compassion. Their annual correspondence became a ritual of mutual respect and ongoing understanding. Academic conferences frequently invited them as keynote sayers. Their presentations were never polished performances, but raw, genuine conversations about war, humanity, and healing. Young students would sit in rapt attention, hearing first-hand accounts that no textbook could capture. Their story connected particularly strongly in educational settings. Schools in Germany and the United States began using their narrative as a teaching tool, demonstrating how individual choices could challenge systemic hatred. Teachers appreciated how Carter and Severloh's experience offered subtle perspectives on historical events, moving beyond simplistic good versus evil narratives. International media outlets periodically revisited their story, producing documentaries and long-form articles that explored their ongoing friendship. Journalists were consistently struck by the genuine warmth between two men who, decades earlier, would have been mortal enemies. Researchers continued discovering fascinating details about their individual backgrounds. They learned that Severloh's medical knowledge stemmed from his family's long tradition of rural healthcare, with generations of farmers and local healers who understood practical medical interventions. Their correspondence became an invaluable historical archive. The psychological depth of their relationship continued to fascinate researchers. As medical technology advanced, researchers continued studying Severloh's battlefield treatment techniques, recognizing them as important historical documentation of pre-modern medical interventions. In 1995, Carter traveled to Normandy with his family, retracing the steps of that fateful day. Severloh met him there, walking the same ground where they had once been mortal enemies. Local French historians documented their reunion, capturing photographs that became powerful symbols of reconciliation. Their final years were marked by mutual support and deep respect. When Carter faced health challenges in 2002, Severloh made multiple trips to the United States, helping his friend through medical treatments. When Severloh's wife passed away in 2005, Carter was there, providing emotional support that went far beyond their wartime connection. Academics continued analyzing their relationship. Elena Rodriguez, a renowned conflict resolution specialist from the University of Madrid, published a comprehensive study examining how individual human connections could challenge systemic historical narratives. By 2010, both men were in their late 80s. Their health was declining, but their connection remained vibrant. On June 6, 2012, precisely 68 years after their initial encounter on Omaha Beach, they were jointly awarded the International Peace Medal by the United Nations. Carter passed away in 2013 at 89. Severloh, devastated but grateful for their decades of friendship, wrote a final tribute that was published in multiple international publications. Their correspondence, carefully preserved, became a critical historical archive. Their story challenged simplistic narratives about World War II, demonstrating that compassion could emerge from the most violent human encounters. The last letter between them, written just months before Carter's death, spoke not of war, but of friendship, family, and shared memories. It remained proof of their remarkable connection. Heinrich Severloh died in 2015, having transformed from a German soldier to a symbol of reconciliation. His family preserved his correspondence and documentation, donating critical materials to historical archives in both Germany and the United States. Museums in Normandy and Washington, D.C. Educational programs use their story to teach complex lessons about empathy, understanding, and human potential for transformation. Subscribe if this story interested you, and you want to hear more like it. The legacy of Carter and Severloh extended far beyond their personal story. Academic institutions worldwide began using their relationship as a case study in conflict resolution and human empathy. The University of Hamburg established the Carter-Severloh Peace Fellowship in 2016, providing scholarships for students studying international reconciliation. Their grandchildren became close friends, continuing the remarkable connection that began on the beaches of Normandy. Most significantly, their story inspired a generation of historians and peace activists to look beyond traditional war narratives. Museums in Berlin, London, and Washington, D.C. began featuring exhibits that highlighted personal stories of humanity amid conflict. The book revealed intricate details about their personal transformations, showing how individual compassion could challenge systemic hatred. Local schools in Normandy began using their story in history curricula, teaching students about the complex human dynamics of World War II. The French government posthumously awarded both men the Legion of Honor in 2014, recognizing their contribution to post-war reconciliation. Their families attended the ceremony together, symbolizing the continued bond between two former enemies. Researchers discovered that their correspondence contained over 247 letters spanning 5 decades, each document carefully preserved and annotated. These letters became critical primary sources for understanding the psychological healing that can occur after violent conflicts. In 2018, a documentary titled Battlefield Compassion premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, telling their complete story. The film won multiple international awards, and was praised for its subtle portrayal of human connection beyond national boundaries. The most tangible legacy of Carter and Severloh remained their fundamental message, that empathy can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that individual human connections can transform historical narratives. Subscribe if this story interested you, and you want to hear more like it. Academic journals published extensive analyses of their correspondence, highlighting how individual relationships could challenge geopolitical animosities. The original letters were eventually digitized by the United States National Archives, ensuring their preservation for future generations. Scholars from Germany, France, and the United States collaborated to create comprehensive annotated editions, making their remarkable experience accessible to researchers worldwide. A traveling exhibition featuring photographs, letters, and personal artifacts began touring military museums in Europe and North America. Universities in Berlin, Paris, and Washington established annual lectures examining their story as a case study in reconciliation. Young historians and diplomats studied their transformation as a powerful model of personal and collective healing. Their descendants continued the legacy of understanding. Carter's granddaughter became a human rights lawyer, while Severloh's grandson worked in international conflict mediation. They maintained close contact, showing the cross-cultural bridge their grandfathers had first constructed. Their narrative became a powerful reminder that individual choices matter more than broad historical narratives. The final chapter of their story was not about war, but about understanding. Their correspondence demonstrated that true reconciliation happens not through grand political gestures, but through patient, persistent human connection. Carter's remaining personal documents were similarly entrusted to academic institutions, ensuring their legacy would continue to educate and inspire. Subscribe if this story interested you and you want to hear more like it. The Foundation created annual scholarships for young students studying conflict resolution, specifically targeting regions with historical tensions. These scholarships would fund research and exchange programs that emphasized human connection over political division. Museums in Europe and North America began using their correspondence as primary educational materials about reconciliation. Interestingly, genetic researchers became fascinated by their narrative, studying how traumatic experiences might be transmitted across generations. Their families participated in groundbreaking studies about intergenerational healing and psychological resilience. Academic programs in peace studies began using their correspondence as a primary case study in understanding human empathy. Their legacy proved that humanity's capacity for understanding could always triumph over inherited prejudices. What began as a moment of battlefield mercy had rippled across decades, transforming how people understood conflict, forgiveness, and human connection. Subscribe if this story interested you and you want to hear more like it.